there, Lunar Squadron, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to another Star Wars Jedi Survivor video. Today we are going to be talking about one of the hottest topics when it comes to Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Leading up to the release of the game in just a couple weeks, we have reached out and asked all of you what you are most interested in for this game, and so very many of you have reiterated your interest in talking about the blaster combat in this game. Now, a lot of people on YouTube haven't even talked about the blaster combat, including us. We're kind of guilty of that. But today we are going to tell all. This is going to be a complete dump of everything we know about the combat for the blaster combat stance in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. We're going to be giving you all of the details that we learned behind closed doors, where we got to see a demonstration from Jason DeHarris, the design director and lead combat designer for Jedi Survivor. We have so much cool stuff to share that no one has really talked about so far. So before we get into that discussion, if you are new to the channel, we would absolutely love to have you. All you got to do is hit that little red subscribe button and make sure to hit the bell notification button right on next to it. It's going to let you know every single time that Nick and I upload the latest and greatest Jedi Survivor content on YouTube. That said, Nick, are you ready to get into this discussion?
Yes, I very much am. We have so much exciting stuff to share from our time at the preview event and so many details about the blaster combat, and I can't wait to share them with everybody.
All right, Nick, there is so much to talk about when it comes to this awesome combat stance in this game. We really did get to see a really cool demonstration of the blaster combat stance, and we'd love to paint as vivid a picture as possible that we can in this video and answer as many of the questions that we've gotten about the blaster combat stance in this video, because there has not been too much by way of official release in the trailers that we've seen throughout this game's marketing campaign. So this is really our chance to show to all of you through our words and through this conversation exactly what to expect when it comes to that blaster combat stance, right, Nick?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you said, there is no public footage. There is no official footage of the blaster combat. We just got to see it at the preview event, and we think it would be really cool and really important to share all of the information that we know. So what I want to start off with is just the overall look of the stance, kind of how it operates. And it's actually really cool how this stance operates. I really like it. So in one hand, you will be holding your lightsaber, and in the other hand, you will be holding the blaster. So you will be using both the blaster and the lightsaber at the same time, and it's just a really cool look. It reminds me of Empire Strikes Back, a lot of it, where Luke on Cloud City has his blaster and his lightsaber, like he's able to use both. I just think it's really cool. It's going to be really versatile. And what I really remember, one of the big things I remember early on from this demonstration was that you will have mixed in animations with the blaster. You won't just be using the blaster to shoot enemies. The blaster is mixed in as like a sort of melee weapon in the animations. And the animations for this stance, just like all of the animations for all the other stances up to this point, are really cool. They really work well together. It's really well incorporated, like the blaster into the melee combat with the lightsaber. It's just really cool looking.
Yeah, I remember from the demonstration that we saw a few, almost like a pistol whip animation that was mixed in with the different combos. And I do remember, just like with all of the stances, there being a lot of different animation sets just within this particular combat stance. And that's one thing that I really was impressed with across the board with Survivor, was the combat never felt stale because of the variety of animations. And I do want to really highlight the flexibility and fluidity of the blaster combat style. Now, Nick, do you kind of want to articulate some of the limitations when it comes to the blaster here? This isn't going to be like a light machine gun that you can just keep shooting, right? There's going to be a bit of a limitation when it comes to how many blaster bolts you're able to shoot, and then how you go ahead and recharge the blaster, because it's not like other games where you pick up ammunition, right?
No, you aren't picking up ammunition along the way. You know, you're not pulling blaster bolt ammunition off dead bodies of stormtroopers. And like you said, it's not a machine gun. You're not running around with like an E11. It is a handheld blaster. It's a handgun. And I actually love the way that Respawn chose to handle ammunition in this game for Jedi Survivor with this combat stance, because it works very similarly, if not identically, to the way that Force works in this game. And what I mean by that is as you deplete your blaster bolts, the way you will charge those blaster bolts back up is getting dirty, getting in the trenches with your saber and striking enemies with the saber, and that will refill the blaster bolts. Now, that doesn't, it's not hyper realistic. That's not how you would reload a gun, but this is Star Wars we're talking about. This is a video game, and it just helps with the overall flow of combat with this stance, because you can use your blaster from long range, and then you can jump in with your saber in your other hand and get those cool animations to trigger where you can pistol whip people and strike them with the saber. All at the same time, you're reloading your blaster so that if you need to create distance for yourself and use the blaster, you will have a full charge to use with your blaster. It's a really unique thing that they've decided to do, a really unique system, but a really cool one, and one that I think really fits this stance well. Now, speaking of the way that the blaster is used in this game, we saw a couple different combos and abilities that the blaster is able to do in this demonstration. Now, there is just a standard blaster shot. It's standard blaster shot. There's not much to be said about it. There is also, we saw a charge shot where you could charge up the blaster and unleash a more heavy attack, similar to what we would expect heavy saber strikes to look like from the other stances. It's a very similar. There's a standard shot, and then there's a charge shot. And Andreas, at the very end of this demonstration, we got to see something really cool. We got to see a third ability, and it was pretty damn cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this is one that I think this is one of the few details that has been spread around. I know I've heard a few other people talk about this because of how cool it was, and I think we might have brought this up in our overall breakdown of our experience, and that is the ability that looked almost like the Jedi ability from Red Dead Redemption, or I believe Lando Calrissian's one of his abilities in Battlefront 2, where you can almost paint targets on different enemies, and then Cal goes ahead and shoots all of them. And I believe when he's marking those targets, time is slowed down a bit, and then he takes all of those shots very fast. And in the demo, Jason DeHarris actually combined this ability with the Force Lift ability. And this is very important for multiple reasons. First, it's cool as hell because he is able to lift up. I don't know, Nick, wasn't it like something like 10 stormtroopers in the demo? Like, it was a lot of stormtroopers that he was lifting into the air. And then while they were levitating into the air, he painted targets on all of them and then shot all of them, which was super cool. Just a really cool and inventive way to combine the Force with the blaster. And Nick, what was important for this for me is it showed to us that you are able to use your Force abilities when you are using the blaster stance. And I'm not sure if you're able to do things like a lightsaber throw when you're using the blaster stance because you have the blaster with you as your ranged weapon. But one thing that we do know now from seeing that is you are able to combine your different Force abilities and the abilities that you have from the Force skill trees in this game with your blaster combat stance, which is very cool.
Yeah, I think those are two very important points to include in this conversation, is that you will still be able to use your general Force abilities, the Force pulls, the Force pushes, while utilizing this stance. Like, Cal uses the hand that is holding the blaster to still use the Force. But what I did notice in what you just mentioned is the saber abilities were really pulled back. It was just more of a basic saber strike type stance. There wasn't really anything special going on with the saber as far as saber throws or any of those crazy moves. It was more so like a bonus weapon in this stance. Really, the focus of this stance, which makes sense, it is the blaster combat stance. The focus of this stance was clearly the blaster, and the saber was just an added bonus. If you want more of those crazy, saber animations and abilities, saber throws, all of that, that's why the 4 other combat stances exist in this game. You're not going to find that in the blaster combat stance, but it was still cool to be able to use the lightsaber alongside the blaster. It was a really cool stance. Now, just a couple other things I want to mention just about the overall experience of seeing this is there is a user interface on the side of the screen when using the blaster combat stance that will indicate how many blaster bolts you have at that current time. And if I remember correctly, when Jason was going through this, there was roughly 8 to 10 blaster bolts included in that user interface. So he had about 8 or 10 shots available to him at that time as at a max charge. We're assuming, since the blaster combat has a skill tree, and what we know about video games, that you will be able to upgrade the ammo capacity for this blaster. We're not sure how far you'll be able to do it, but we think it's pretty intuitive to expect that to be one of those abilities in the skill tree for this combat stance. But yes, the user interface on the side does indicate how many blaster bolts you add. And if I noticed, it looked like there were some separated at the bottom of the user interface, if I remember correctly. And I believe when he used the charged shot, it pulled from that reserve, so it kind of separates the standard blaster bolts from the charged blaster bolts, at least cosmetically, to show off what is being used by what ability by Cal there, just to kind of help the player know how many blaster bolts they have available to them and when they need to, get into the trenches and start using the saber to reload those blaster bolts. But I think it's important to note that there is a user interface for this combat stance that just helps indicate and help you keep track of how many blaster bolts that you have available to you. Now, Andreas, I want to talk about our impressions of this combat stance, because like we've said, there is no footage out there yet. All we've seen is this brief demonstration from Jason, but in my opinion, this combat stance really looks like it is going to be a lot of fun to use in this game. I don't think it's going to be the primary stance that I'm going to use, because I was really, really enjoying the dual wield and double bladed saber stance. But I think this one is going to be very versatile, and I think that people are going to have a lot of fun with it. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it. I think it's just another stance by Respawn that's just going to help this game be more fun than Fallen Order was.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Nick. I think this is a good stance if you're having difficulty getting in deep and close with your opponents. You can start from range with this combat stance, and you can really assert yourself from a range, maybe pick off a few enemies, and then once you've exhausted all of your blaster bolts that you have, like Nick said, I think you're going to have about 6 or 7 at first. Maybe you're able to upgrade. Not sure. I don't remember exactly how many blaster bolts he did use, but like Nick said, there's a whole skill tree dedicated to this stance, and I'm willing to bet that at least one of those skills has to be to give you more blaster shots, or I'm assuming maybe, I'm obviously speculating here, so don't take this as confirmation, but I'm guessing there might be a way to maybe collect blaster bolts faster. I don't know. We can do a whole separate video on speculating the blaster abilities, but it might be a great way for you to kind of balance range and close range, where you can, pick off a few enemies from afar, go in, get dirty, get your bullets back, and then kind of take a step back and pick off a few more. This is definitely a stance that I wish I had maybe when I was facing off against the Rancor. Not permanently, but it would have been nice to have a gun and maybe shoot at the Rancor a few times and get some damage done before I really got in there and put myself at risk of getting one-shotted up against the Rancor. But I know this is going to be a very cool stance to really balance how much you are going in from range, how much you are going to be getting in there and getting your bullets back. And attacks like the charge shot are going to be using more bullets. So you're going to really want to think before you use some of those abilities and do the calculus in your head. Is it worth using more bullets at once? Are you going to reserve them? And it's going to add more dynamics to this game and it's going to make the combat for Survivor that much more dynamic over Fallen Order.
I think it's hilarious that you brought up the Rancor thing about you wishing you had the blaster, because I'm pretty sure during the preview event when we were playing against the Rancor, I turned to you and said, damn, I really wish we had the blaster combat stance right now just to get some shots in on the Rancor to help us out here, just so that we could fight him from range. We could add a little range into our repertoire here instead of having to get in dirty and get right up in the Rancor's face, which was just incredibly dangerous and cost us a few times. It would have been really nice to have the blaster combat stance. Now, the biggest thing I want all of you to take away from this video, if there's one thing I want you guys to take away from this, is that this combat stance, from what we saw at this preview event, it's going to be incredibly versatile. And I think we've really painted that picture over the course of this video. And I think it's going to be really useful against a whole multitude of enemies, just because, like we said, you have the saber in one hand, you have the blaster in one hand, so you can go for those long-range attacks if you really need to remove yourself from battle. Say you're low on health or you're hurting, you can still deal damage to enemies and kill enemies off from a range, and you're not risking dying. It allows you to do that, and at the same time, it also allows you to still get in close and get in the trenches and fight those enemies with the lightsaber. It offers both. It is maybe the most versatile stance in the game from what we've seen, just because it offers that long-range component with that close-range component. So again, biggest takeaway I want for you guys is it's a really versatile stance that I think is going to be effective against pretty much every single enemy type in this game, save maybe the droidicas with their shields. I don't know how effective the blaster bolts will be against shields, but we will have to wait and see, because this demonstration was purely against scout troopers and stormtroopers, if I remember correctly, but it was tearing them up, guys. This combat stance is incredibly cool. It looks like it's going to be so much fun to use. We cannot wait to get our hands on it and use it more, and we can't wait for all of you guys to experience it for the first time when Jedi Survivor launches. Perhaps EA or Respawn will show something in the next few weeks, but we have a feeling they're going to keep that one close to their chest until the game releases, and we can all experience it together when Jedi Survivor comes out. Hopefully, guys, we answered some of your questions. Like Andrea said at the beginning, a lot of you over the last few weeks have been asking us about the blaster combat stance, what we saw. A lot of you have been saying how much you want to see more about it. So we wanted to sit down and make this video and hopefully provide some insight into how the blaster combat stance works since we've seen it, and hopefully answer some of your questions about it. If you have any additional questions, go down below in the comments and leave your question, and we will do our best here to answer that question honestly and accurately as we possibly can. But with all of that, that is going to do it for us for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, we will see you all next time.